Hello and welcome to National Park Wild. I'm Eric, and I know it's been a little while since I made a video, but I recently went on a trip to South Dakota in the Black Hills, and as you saw in the title, I went to 5 park sites in one day. These are Mount Rushmore, Wind Cave National Park, Custer State Park, Badlands National Park, and Devil's Tower National Monuments. So technically, yeah, Custer's not a park property, but it's near Wind Cave and it was a cool place to see. Now, a quick thing before I get into talking about each of these individual places. Some may think going to all of these in one day is not a very good way to see the parks. And yeah, it does seem that way at first, but I actually got to do pretty much everything I wanted to in every park. I had plenty of time to relax and some. It was a long day, but we saw quite a bit of stuff. And honestly, I don't think I needed a second day to go to these parks. I saw everything I wanted to see, everything I needed to see, and I think I have a pretty good grip on how I feel about these parks. So let's start with the one I went to first, Mount Rushmore National Memorial. So I had already been here before actually, back in 2015, one of my first park sites ever. It was cool, I liked it as a young kid. Now it was way cooler because we went before sunrise. And going at sunrise is so cool as the mountain is orange. That is really amazing, and that was the highlight of that. There were plenty of deer that morning along the way. They're just very active at that point in the day. So it was really cool. I liked Mount Rushmore a lot. We didn't do a ton there. We walked around the area. We had seen it before. And this time we saw more. And I was happy we got to see the sunrise. It was definitely a cool sight. The only thing I don't like is that you don't really see parking garages in any other national park site. So that is something that takes away from the national park aspect of it. But it's a very good national memorial. Next, we drove through Custer State Park on the way to Wind Cave. And just driving through before we actually did anything in Custer, we enjoyed some of the scenery, but mainly really liked seeing a lot of deer, a bison, and a pronghorn antelope. And one very interesting thing to note is that Wind Cave National Park and Custer State Park are bordering and separated by a fence. That was a bit weird to me, but I still think it was pretty cool that we got to be so close and got to stand in 2 parks at once. That's pretty fun. So, Wind Cave. On the way to booking a cave tour, we saw Prairie Dog Town, and I must say, if you like prairie dogs, go here at some point. Prairie dogs are everywhere. It's really, really cool to see so many of them. The whole towns, the tiny burrows, and the prairie dogs chirping. Really fun. So we went to the visitor center to book our cave tour, and if you are booking a cave tour, here's a few good tips. First of all, you have to go first come, first serve for these tickets. Unless you're doing the Wild Cave Tour or the Candlelight Tour, I believe. The other ones, you have to do first come, first serve basis. Go to the visitor center and book them. The visitor center opened at 8 when we went, and we were in line at 7:40-ish, seems right. And there were probably 50 people in front of us. So it does get pretty crowded quickly. So you probably do want to get there around 7:30 to confirm that you're getting the tour you want. At least a half hour early is what I'm saying. Now here is the biggest issue. Sometimes, I'm not quite sure why, certain tours are not offered. Here is an example. We went hoping to do the Fairgrounds tour, which is a bit longer than the others and seems to show a bit more of the caves. Unfortunately, the only tour being offered this day was Natural Entrance. A shorter, albeit still very nice, one. We were a bit surprised that on a busy Saturday, only one type of cave tour was being offered. I asked why, and I was not given an answer. So, just be aware of that. Don't expect to get your number one choice of cave tour first come, first serve. That said, the Natural Entrance tour is quite nice. It's not like Carlsbad Caverns, for those who have been there, where it's massive rooms, stalactites, stalagmites. The big thing about Wind Cave is its uniqueness and quirkiness. What do I mean by that? It's very narrow, small, somewhat scary if you're claustrophobic, but it's really cool. There's very few large rooms, and the ceiling is never that high above your head. I thought this was quite cool. I enjoyed the cave tour quite a bit. One of the interesting things is that we went in this one room, and they were able to turn lights on and off. That is cool. I like that a lot. The lights would be pretty bright, and you'd see the entire ceiling of boxwork, which, by the way, is a really cool cave formation to see. And then the lights would be completely off and be pitch black. Keep in mind, if you have young kids, and you're in the pitch black room, they will probably cry. I know from experience. Not myself, but others in our group. So, following that, you see popcorn, a different cave formation. It's pretty cool. Popcorn looks like popcorn, as you would guess. And the other thing to note is that there are different types of features that you can see on the Fairgrounds tour. There's one called Frostwork that kind of looks like ice, is really cool. But the main feature is boxwork. The stalactites and stalagmites here are like inches long at most. Meanwhile, boxwork is everywhere, and it's pretty cool. You learn quite a bit on the cave tour, and the natural entrance itself, you see it from outside the cave. You don't go through the natural entrance. It is 10 inches wide, and it's mainly like an entrance for bats. So it makes sense that the entire tour group would not go through this 10-inch hole. It is cool to see though, and you see that that's how wind gets into Wind Cave. Overall, I really enjoyed the cave tour. Do I like Carlsbad Caverns a lot more? Yes I do. That said, it is a really cool tour. I like caves, and while these were definitely not Carlsbad Caverns, that doesn't matter too much because they were still really awesome. On the way out of Wind Cave, we did 2 hikes. Pretty long ones, very nice. There isn't a ton of scenery above ground at Wind Cave. It's mainly prairie, but it's nice. There's a few rocks, but it's mainly just prairie. And on the way out, we saw a herd of bison and many prairie dogs. So wildlife is pretty good here. There were deer just outside the park, the bison, prairie dogs, pretty solid for wildlife. Overall, Wind Cave is a nice national park. It's definitely near the bottom for me. When I say near, I say like it's bottom 20, which is not a bad thing, as of the 59 parks I've now been to, 55 are good, and probably 50 are great. And Wind Cave is a really nice park. The only thing that keeps it from being higher is that there just isn't as much to see in terms of impressive scenery. There's not as much recreation or hiking. The wildlife and the cave tour are the highlights, and it's a good park overall. Driving through Custer was next on the agenda, and like Wind Cave, the above ground scenery isn't amazing. There's kind of the Yellowstone-esque prairie aspect. There's a few rock formations, but there's not really mountains or anything that you're going to be taking pictures of in terms of the land that's surrounding you. But that is made up for with wildlife. We saw plenty of pronghorn antelope in the park driving along the wildlife loop road, but the highlight was bison. A full herd of at least 200 bison we saw twice at one point. There were 2 different herds. It really reminded me of Yellowstone at that point, and that's pretty much the highest honor a park can get, if it reminds me of Yellowstone. We didn't do much else in Custer, but we really did enjoy seeing so many awesome animals. And the wildlife in Custer was probably the best wildlife we saw that day. Following this, we drove to Badlands National Park. I had went to Badlands in 2015. It had been 6 years, which is the longest time I had gone without visiting a park I'd already been to. I had revisited basically every other that I went to before it, and a lot of others I went to more recently. Going back to Badlands was very nice. We did some shorter trails, but we did the Notch Trail as well, and Notch Trail is pretty nice. You climb up a ladder at one point, which is pretty cool. The scenery is good, and it kind of reminds me of Arches, or the Needles part of Canyonlands, in that it's not super large scale, but there's a lot of cool details and shapes, and it is really nice scenery. The weirdest part of the park for me is that a lot of the wall honestly felt like it was surrounded by interstate and you could look anywhere and basically see it as civilization. So like the rest of South Dakota, it did have a little bit of a touristy feel more than most other national parks. That said, the hiking and scenery were really nice. The Badlands Loop Road, though maybe not one of the best drives in the park system like some say, is a very nice drive, and I really enjoyed it. We didn't see any wildlife in Badlands, but we'd seen some on our first visit, so it was okay. Overlooks of the wall look really cool when it's kind of like there's some red painted line along them. It's very similar to Blue Mesa at Petrified Forest. That said, I like this better than that. I think it's a much cooler sight to see. Not much else to say about Badlands. It's very nice. It was pretty crowded, but honestly, we were there at a very popular time, so of course it's going to have some people. Badlands is overall a very good park. It is bottom half, but again, that's not a bad thing. To be in top half is a really high honor. And I thought Badlands was really beautiful, and the scenery was nice. The only thing that holds it back is the slight feel that you're not really in the wilderness. It is a very good park though, and I definitely recommend it. Our final site we went to, after a quick stop at Manamat Missile that I'm not going to talk about here, was Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming. Outside of Yellowstone and Grand Teton, this is probably the only thing a lot of people have heard of in Wyoming. And honestly, of all the things we saw, Wind Cave National Park, Custer State Park, Mount Rushmore National Memorial, Badlands National Park, I think Devil's Tower was my favorite place. It's not by a lot, as a lot of these are pretty close together in terms of how much I like them, but Devil's Tower was amazing. All the different angles of the site are really cool. It's a really fascinating rock formation, a really interesting one. It's close to South Dakota, but in the state that shares Yellowstone and Grand Teton, so it's interesting to think about the diversity in the state. The stories and history behind it are pretty cool. Walking around it's awesome. And when you get close enough to it, looking up at it is just mind-boggling, as the perspective is really crazy. I felt dizzy just looking at it. Some of the angles look so cool with the sort of scratch marks it looks like are on the side of it. And overall, it's just a really awesome site. Definitely my favorite site of everything that we saw on this trip. And I thought it was really cool to be there at sunset. There were plenty of deer out and about, and there's some prairie dog towns too. So it has the best of Badlands and Wind Cave. It has the wildlife we saw in Wind Cave, and the rock formations that Badlands has, not the same ones of course, but ones that are just as cool, if not better. And even if it is just one single formation that the park has, I think it's really awesome. And I honestly think Devil's Tower is a great contender to be one of the next national parks. I truly think it is worthy of park status. And that is how we ended our day. If I were to try to rank the 5 things we did, it'd be very tough. But Devil's Tower was my favorite, probably followed by Badlands. Then I would say Mount Rushmore, then Custer, and Wind Cave just barely behind because the wildlife is a bit better in Custer. Wind Cave is still a great place, but overall, I think that was how I would rank them. It's not certain, but this was a really fun trip, and South Dakota is a very beautiful state. Even if it does have a bit of the tourist trap feel when you're driving by so many billboards for Wall Drug, or so many small towns with zipline stuff set up, the natural beauty is not overtaken or undermined by the incredible, awful tourist stuff. That said, the nature easily overshadows that. And South Dakota was a great state to go to, and I'm happy I have gone to 59 national parks now. Soon I plan to go to a few more. I'll give some more on that another time. And I have new Alaska videos coming out soon. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time.